environmental activist. You are passionate about issues surrounding climate change to make sure that we still have a planet for the next generation and the generations to come. You are firmly about gender equality and women's rights. And I also want to chat about food, nutrition, health, and longevity. So I'm going to squeeze all of that in between now and 8 o'clock. We'll also open up the WhatsApp line if you have any questions or comments for Coral Vinsen. Maybe you need some help regarding Amnesty International, or maybe you want to contribute or become a volunteer. We'd love to hear from you. 071 613 7803. Here's a young lady who is, firmly into her 8th decade. You could be very easily enjoying your retirement, reading a book, listening to the radio.
So boring.
But there you go. Right? Because you are still making a difference, and you're still exceptionally active, and you're still smiling and bubbly, which is credit to all the good things that you're doing. So let me start off. Firstly, talking about you, Coral. Why get involved with social justice campaigns, Amnesty International? The work you've done for human rights. What was your motivating factor?
I think it was. It started a little bit after I got married. I married John Vinsen, who was a member of NUSAS in the early days.
Right.
He was a civil engineer, and NUSAS were the first university group who were to try to open the universities to all race groups, because at that time they were closed. UCT, University of Natal, they were all closed to people who were not white.
So what year did you and John get married then?
We were married in February 1956.
Okay. So Feb 1956, John was then part of NUSAS.
Yeah.
And did that kind of...
No, he had been when he was a student, because he was 28 when we got married.
Right. So what's the link then between, John and then, your foray into social justice, human rights?
Well, because John took me to the first Progressive Party meeting in 1959, shortly after we were married, and they were the first white party, because you could only have white parties, you couldn't have mixed parties.
Well, it was apartheid, right? I mean, so
yes.
The political organizations were for one race group.
Yes, so they wanted to extend the franchise to all race, to a qualified franchise to other people, provided they had a JC. That was the sort of the cutting.
So when you say provided they had a JC?
Yes, then they could become a member. They wanted to extend, anybody who had a JC could vote. But
Right. So what's a JC?
Standard 8.
Ah, okay.
Junior
certificate. Okay,
yes.
SC being senior certificate. All right, okay, I'm with you. So was that really the trigger for you?
Well, then I became...
If you pardon the pun, because I know you're into non-violence, so when I say trigger as opposed to, was that the spark?
Yes. Well, when I got married, I worked for the health department in virology. The first virology lab in Durban was opened,
Right.
and I was sent for training to Johannesburg to the Polio Research Foundation, because there was a huge polio epidemic in Natal in South Africa. And then I met John there. We got married a year later, and the state didn't employ married women. So I was at home then.
Hang on, the state did not employ
married women, yes.
My goodness.
Yes.
And the reason for
so
that?
you had to leave.
So if you're married, you had to go home and
Yes.
take care of the
They
family.
didn't have married women.
My word.
And then
I didn't know that.
And then my colleague who'd also trained with me also got married. They closed down the lab. They'd spent all that money to set it up and to train us, and they closed down the lab.
How stupid. So because you were married and your colleague was married,
Yes.
the lab shut down.
Yes. They closed the lab down because they didn't have trained staff.
And here you went and trained as a medical technologist, right?
Yes.
You had the qualifications.
Yes.
You fell in love. Nothing wrong with that. Getting married, nothing wrong with that. And you're out of a job.
And I stayed at home for the next 20 years, and I became increasingly involved in all sorts of issues.
How long did the apartheid government take before they changed that rule that if you're a married woman, then they can't employ you?
I don't know, because I wasn't working, but I went back in 1980, so I stopped in 1957 when I got married, and then when I went back in 1980, they were employing married women. and I had decided, I had I used to run the elections for the Progressive Party, and then I was chair of the women's group, and I started to invite people from other race groups to address our meetings, and so I had friends, you know, in other race groups. So I was very lucky, because in those days society was very, very closed.
Well, we lived in boxes, right?
Yes,
and we kind of ignore one another.